The wrench slipped from Thomas Reed's oil-stained fingers and clattered against the concrete floor of his workshop. He stared at it for a long moment, watching the metal gleam under the single hanging bulb, before bending down to retrieve it. His knees protested the movement. Everything protested these days. The old Ford pickup he was working on had been sitting in the same spot for 3 weeks now, and he kept finding reasons not to finish the repair job. Mrs. Henderson had stopped calling to ask about it. Maybe she'd finally given up on him like everyone else seemed to have done. The rain hammered against the tin roof with relentless fury, creating a rhythm that matched the dull ache in his chest. October in Montana meant cold nights and colder mornings, but Thomas barely noticed anymore. He'd stopped feeling much of anything after Anna's funeral 18 months ago. The cancer had taken her slowly, piece by piece, until there was nothing left but memories and the empty side of a bed he couldn't bring himself to sleep in anymore. He wiped his hands on a rag that had seen better days and glanced at the clock mounted above his tool bench. midnight. Another sleepless night stretched ahead of him like an endless highway with no destination in sight. The farmhouse across the gravel driveway sat dark and hollow, filled with furniture he never touched and photographs he couldn't bear to look at. So he spent his nights here, in the workshop, pretending to fix things that didn't really matter. The rain suddenly stopped. Not gradually, not with a gentle tapering off, but all at once, like someone had flipped a switch. Thomas frowned and moved toward the workshop door, pulling it open to peer out into the night. The air smelled different, charged with something he couldn't identify. It reminded him of the moment before lightning strikes, that electric tension that makes your hair stand on end and your heart beat faster. That's when he saw her. She stood in the middle of his driveway, rain-soaked and shimmering under the pale moonlight that had suddenly broken through the clouds. Her skin held a faint luminescence, like pearl dust mixed with starlight, and her hair fell in waves of deep violet that seemed to move with a life of their own. She wore no clothes, but there was nothing provocative about her nakedness. It was natural, innocent, like a newborn creature fresh from creation. Thomas felt his breath catch in his throat. His first instinct was to look away, to give her privacy, but he couldn't move. Her eyes found his across the distance, and they were the color of nebulas, swirling with purples and blues and specks of gold that seemed to pulse with inner light. She didn't appear frightened or lost. She looked purposeful, like she had traveled a great distance to stand in this exact spot. "You're real," Thomas heard himself say, his voice rough from disuse and shock. She tilted her head slightly, studying him with an intensity that made him feel transparent. "As real as pain," she replied, and her voice was like wind chimes in a gentle breeze, melodic and haunting. "As real as the grief you carry in your bones." Thomas took a step back, his hand gripping the doorframe for support. "Who are you? What do you want?" She moved toward him with fluid grace, her feet barely seeming to touch the wet gravel. "My name is Celeste. I come from a place your scientists call the Veloran Constellation, though we have no need for such labels. I am an empath, a soul tender, sent to those whose heartbreak threatens to tear holes in the fabric of emotional reality." "That's not possible." Thomas shook his head, trying to clear the fog of confusion. "You're not real. I'm having some kind of breakdown." Celeste stopped a few feet away from him, and he could feel warmth radiating from her skin despite the cold night air. "You've been calling out," she said softly. Not with words, but with the silent screams of a heart that no longer wishes to beat. "Your pain has been echoing across the cosmos for months now, growing stronger, more desperate. I felt it from light years away." Thomas wanted to laugh, to dismiss her words as madness, but tears were sliding down his cheeks before he could stop them. "I didn't call anyone," he whispered. "I just want it to stop hurting." "I know." Celeste reached out but didn't touch him, her hand hovering inches from his chest. "May I enter your space? Your workshop? I promise I mean you no harm. My species has been watching humanity for centuries, drawn to your capacity for deep emotion. We've learned that sometimes the most profound healing happens when two different worlds collide." Thomas found himself nodding, stepping aside to let her pass. She moved into the workshop, and immediately the space felt different, warmer, more alive than it had in months. She glanced around at the scattered tools, the half-finished projects, the coffee cups with moldy remnants he'd forgotten to clean. "You've been hiding here," she observed, running her fingers along the workbench. "Creating distance between yourself and the life you shared with her. Anna. Her name still lives in every corner of your home, doesn't it?" Thomas felt his legs go weak. He leaned against the truck, staring at this impossible being who somehow knew his deepest secret. "How do you know her name?" Celeste turned to face him, and her expression held such compassion that it made his chest ache even more. "Because her love is woven into your soul's signature. Every thought you have carries her echo. Every breath you take still seeks her presence. You're not just grieving, Thomas. You're drowning in an ocean of unprocessed sorrow, and you've given up trying to swim." "Maybe I want to drown," he said, his voice breaking. "Maybe that would be easier than waking up every day knowing she's never coming back." "Perhaps." Celeste moved closer, and this time she did touch him, her hand resting gently on his forearm. Her skin was impossibly soft, and where she touched him, he felt a warmth spread through his body like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. But drowning would be a waste of the beautiful complexity that is Thomas Reed. "Your grief is valid, but it doesn't have to be your ending." Thomas looked down at her hand on his arm, at the way her fingers seemed to glow with that strange inner light. "Why are you really here? What does an alien empath want with a broken-down mechanic in the middle of nowhere?" Celeste smiled, and it transformed her entire face, making her seem almost human. "Because broken doesn't mean worthless. Because your species fascinates us with your ability to love so deeply it can destroy you, yet still you continue to love. And because, Thomas Reed, you deserve to know that your pain matters. That you matter." The workshop fell silent except for the sound of Thomas's ragged breathing and the distant hoot of an owl. He stared at this strange visitor from the stars, this being who had somehow crossed the vast emptiness of space to stand in his workshop and tell him he mattered. Part of him wanted to push her away, to retreat back into the comfortable numbness that had become his only companion. But another part, a part he thought had died with Anna, stirred with something that felt dangerously close to hope. "I don't understand any of this," Thomas finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You don't have to understand," Celeste replied gently. "Not yet. For now, just know that you're not alone anymore. And that sometimes, healing begins with the most unexpected encounters." Thomas didn't sleep that night. How could he? Celeste remained in his workshop, moving through the space like she was cataloguing every detail, every memory embedded in the oil stains and scattered tools. She had asked for a blanket, not because she was cold, but because she understood human customs about modesty. He'd brought her an old flannel shirt and work pants that had belonged to him, watching as she examined them with curious fascination before sliding them on. They hung loose on her slender frame, but somehow she made even his worn clothing look otherworldly. "Tell me about your world," Thomas said, breaking the silence as dawn light began filtering through the grimy workshop windows. He'd made coffee on the small hot plate he kept for long nights, and the bitter smell filled the air with something familiar and grounding. Celeste sat cross-legged on his workbench, her hands wrapped around a mug he'd given her. She hadn't drunk from it, just held it, seeming to absorb the warmth. "Velora exists in a dimension slightly adjacent to yours," she began, her voice taking on a dreamy quality. "We don't have cities or buildings the way you do. We live in what you might call emotional constructs, places built from shared feelings and memories. When someone experiences joy, it creates ripples of light. Grief forms pools of shadow. Love builds bridges between souls." Thomas leaned against the truck, trying to wrap his mind around what she was describing. "That sounds beautiful. And terrifying." "It is both." Celeste looked down at the coffee, watching steam rise from its surface. "We evolved differently than humans. Your species developed tools and technology to master your environment. Mine developed empathy to master our inner worlds. We can feel what others feel, sense the emotional undercurrents that flow between beings. It's why we were drawn to Earth. Your emotions are so powerful, so raw and unfiltered. They call out across space like beacons. So you're saying my sadness was loud enough that you heard it from another dimension?" Thomas couldn't keep the skepticism from his voice, even though the evidence of her existence sat right in front of him. Celeste met his gaze, and those swirling nebular eyes held such depth that he felt like he was falling into them. Your sadness is a symphony, Thomas. A tragic, beautiful composition that speaks of love so profound that losing it nearly unmade you. Yes, I heard it. But I wasn't the only one. There are others of my kind spread across this planet right now, drawn to humans whose heartbreak has reached critical levels. Thomas set down his coffee cup, his hands shaking slightly. Critical levels? What does that mean? It means, Celeste said carefully, that you're approaching a point where your will to live is becoming so diminished that your life force itself begins to fade. Humans call it depression, hopelessness, suicidal ideation. We call it soul erosion. If left unchecked, it doesn't just end a life. It damages the emotional fabric of reality around that person, affecting everyone they touch. The words hit Thomas like a physical blow. He'd been having those thoughts, the dark ones that crept in during the deepest hours of night. Thoughts about how easy it would be to just not wake up one morning, about how no one would really miss him, about how the world would keep spinning without Thomas Reed taking up space in it. I'm not going to do anything stupid, he said defensively, but the words felt hollow even to his own ears. Celeste slid off the workbench and moved toward him with that impossibly graceful walk. I'm not here to judge you, Thomas. I'm here to remind you of something you've forgotten. That pain, as terrible as it is proof that you loved deeply. That you're capable of profound connection. Anna's death didn't erase that capacity. It just convinced you that using it again would be too dangerous. Thomas felt his throat tighten. You didn't know her. You don't know what it was like. Then tell me. Celeste settled onto the floor in front of him, looking up with patient expectation. Tell me about Anna. Not how she died, but how she lived. How she loved. What made her laugh? What made her choose you? Thomas opened his mouth to refuse, to change the subject, but something in Celeste's presence made the walls he'd built around his heart feel thinner. The words came slowly at first, then faster, like water breaking through a dam. She laughed at terrible jokes, he found himself saying, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. The worse they were, the harder she'd laugh. She collected vintage teacups from garage sales, said each one had a story to tell. She couldn't carry a tune to save her life but sang in the shower every morning anyway. She loved thunderstorms. Would stand on the porch and just watch the lightning, saying it made her feel alive. Celeste listened without interrupting, and Thomas noticed something strange. As he spoke, her skin began to glow brighter, and the air around them seemed to shimmer with golden light. It was as if his memories were becoming visible, taking on physical form in her presence. She was a teacher, Thomas continued, the words coming easier now. 3rd grade. She'd come home with stories about her kids every day. How little Marcus finally learned to read, how Emma stood up to a bully, how the whole class worked together to save a bird that flew into the classroom window. She believed in people, you know? Believed they were fundamentally good, even when the world gave her every reason to think otherwise. And she believed in you, Celeste said softly. Thomas nodded, tears streaming freely now. I don't know why. I'm just a mechanic. Nothing special. But she looked at me like I hung the moon. Even at the end, when the cancer had taken everything else, she'd hold my hand and tell me I was her greatest adventure. The workshop fell silent except for Thomas's quiet sobbing. He hadn't cried like this since the funeral, hadn't allowed himself to really feel the full weight of his loss. Celeste rose and placed her hand over his heart, and he felt that warmth again, spreading through his chest like liquid sunlight. This is what I came to show you, she said, her voice gentle but firm. The love you shared with Anna didn't die with her. It lives in you, Thomas. In every memory, every story, every moment you choose to honor her by continuing to exist. You think you're broken beyond repair, but I see something different. I see a man who loved so completely that is terrified to open his heart again. Thomas looked down at her hand on his chest, feeling his heartbeat steady under her touch. How do you do that? Make it hurt less. I don't make it hurt less, Celeste corrected. I help you feel it without drowning in it. There's a difference. My species learned long ago that emotions aren't meant to be suppressed or ignored. They're meant to be witnessed, processed, and integrated into who you become. Your grief is part of you now, but it doesn't have to be all of you. Thomas covered her hand with his own, marveling at how something so alien could feel so right. What happens now? You came all this way to give me a pep talk and then you leave. Celeste's expression grew complicated, a mix of emotions crossing her luminous features. My mission was to stabilize your emotional state, to pull you back from the edge. But something unexpected has happened. She paused, seeming to struggle with how to explain. When we bond with a human, when we truly connect with their emotional core, we form a link. I can feel your pain, yes, but I can also feel your strength, your capacity for resilience, your deep well of kindness that you've buried under all this grief. A link. Thomas felt his pulse quicken. What does that mean? It means, Celeste said slowly, that I'm not supposed to feel what I'm feeling. Empaths are meant to observe, to guide, to heal from a distance. But with you, Thomas, the distance has collapsed. Your emotions have become mine. Your grief, your memories of Anna, your desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, life could be worth living again. I feel all of it as if it were my own. Thomas stared at her, understanding dawning with equal parts wonder and fear. You're saying you're connected to me now? Permanently? Not permanently, Celeste clarified, though her voice held uncertainty. The bond can be broken when I return to Velora. But while I'm here, while I'm in your presence, yes. Your heart and mine are beating in synchronization. Your emotional reality has become my emotional reality. Thomas pulled his hand back, suddenly aware of the implications. That's not fair to you. You shouldn't have to carry my mess. Celeste smiled, and there was something achingly human in the expression. Perhaps not. But Thomas, your mess is beautiful. Your capacity to love, to grieve, to hope against all odds, it's extraordinary. My people observe emotions from the outside, but we rarely experience them with this intensity. Being connected to you has shown me something I never understood before. Why humans fight so hard to survive even when survival seems impossible. The morning light was fully illuminating the workshop now, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. Thomas looked at this strange, wonderful being who had crashed into his life like a comet, and felt something shift inside him. Not the grief disappearing, that would never fully go away, but something else emerging alongside it. Curiosity, interest, a tentative desire to see what happened next. How long can you stay? He asked. Celeste's expression grew wistful. 3 of your days. Maybe 4 if I push the boundaries of my assignment. After that, I must return or risk being stranded in your dimension permanently. And if you get stranded? Then I would slowly lose my connection to Velora, to my people, to everything that makes me what I am. I would become something between worlds, belonging fully to neither. She reached out and touched his face gently. But for these few days, Thomas Reed, I am yours. Let me help you remember how to live. The next 3 days passed like a dream Thomas was afraid to wake from. Celeste moved through his life with quiet grace, asking questions about everything, marveling at the simplest things. She was fascinated by the way rain tasted, by the texture of tree bark, by the mechanics of the old Ford truck he finally finished repairing. But more than that, she was fascinated by him. By his stories, his fears, his slow emergence from the cave of grief he'd been hiding in. They talked for hours in the workshop, in the farmhouse he finally allowed himself to enter again, on the porch where Anna used to watch thunderstorms. Celeste wanted to know everything about human love, about how 2 people chose each other and built a life together. Thomas found himself opening up in ways he hadn't since Anna's death, sharing not just the pain but the joy, the mundane beautiful moments that had made their marriage real. On the second night, as they sat under a sky full of stars, Celeste pointed to a cluster of lights near the horizon. That's where I'm from, she said quietly. That constellation you call Velora. Can you see it? Thomas followed her gaze, squinting at the distant stars. I see it. It's beautiful. It's home, Celeste said, and for the first time, he heard sadness in her voice. But being here, with you, has changed me. I understand now why so many of my people who come to Earth struggle to leave. Your world is so visceral, So immediate. Every sensation is magnified. Every emotion carries weight. Thomas felt his chest tighten. He'd been avoiding this conversation, this inevitable ending. You have to go back. Yes. Celeste turned to look at him, her luminous eyes reflecting starlight. But there's something I need to tell you. Something that goes against every protocol of my people. She took a breath, and Thomas realized it was the first time he'd seen her appear nervous. I could take you with me. The words hung in the air between them like a challenge, like a promise, like a threat. Thomas felt his heart race. What? It's rare, but it has happened before. A human traveling to Velora. Your physical form would need to be transformed, adapted to exist in our dimension. You would no longer be entirely human, but you wouldn't be entirely Veloran either. You'd be something new, something in between. Celeste reached for his hand, holding it gently. You could leave this pain behind, Thomas. Start fresh in a world where emotions are understood and valued, where your capacity to feel deeply would make you extraordinary instead of broken. Thomas stared at their joined hands, his mind reeling. To leave Earth. To leave behind the farmhouse and the workshop and every memory of Anna. To transform into something other than what he was. It should have been an easy choice. What did he have here except ghosts and grief? But as he sat there, feeling the cool night air on his skin and hearing the distant sound of crickets, something inside him resisted. If I go with you, he said slowly, what happens to Anna? To my memories of her. Celeste's expression grew pained. They would fade. Not immediately, but over time. Velora exists in emotional present tense. The past becomes less solid, less real. You would remember that you loved, but the specifics, the details that make a person who they are, those would blur and eventually disappear. Thomas pulled his hand back, standing abruptly. He walked to the edge of the porch, gripping the railing hard enough that his knuckles turned white. Then I can't lose her twice. Even if it means living with this pain forever. Celeste had risen too, moving to stand beside him. Thomas, I can feel your suffering. It's a constant weight crushing your spirit. Don't you want to be free of it? No. The word came out stronger than Thomas expected. I mean, yes, of course I want the pain to stop. But not like that. Not by erasing who I was, who she was, what we built together. He turned to face Celeste, and he could see his reflection in her eyes, could see himself as she saw him. Broken, yes, but also resilient. Wounded, but healing. Anna is part of me. The good parts and the painful parts. If I erase her to escape the grief, then what was the point of any of it? Celeste reached up and touched his face, and he saw tears forming in her alien eyes. I thought that's what you'd say. Part of me hoped you would choose differently, that I could keep you with me. But this is why humans are extraordinary. You choose the harder path because it honors what came before. Thomas covered her hand with his own. Will you be okay? Going back? I don't know, Celeste admitted. I've bonded with you more deeply than I should have. Returning to Velora will mean breaking that connection, feeling your absence like a physical wound. It will hurt. But it will also remind me that I lived, that I experienced something real and profound. She smiled through her tears. You've given me a gift, Thomas Reed. You've shown me what it means to love so completely that losing it nearly destroys you, and then choosing to keep living anyway. They stood together on that porch as the night deepened around them, holding each other not with passion but with understanding, with respect for what they'd shared and what they had to release. When the sun rose on the fourth day, Celeste's skin had begun to shimmer more brightly, her form becoming translucent as her time in this dimension ran out. Promise me something, she said as they stood in the workshop where they'd first met. Promise me you'll finish Mrs. Henderson's truck. That you'll call your sister who's been worried about you. That you'll let yourself feel joy again when it comes, even if it feels like a betrayal of Anna's memory. It's not. Joy honors her just as much as grief does. Thomas nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. He watched as Celeste began to fade, her form dissolving into particles of light that danced in the morning sun streaming through the windows. Just before she disappeared completely, she spoke one last time. "Thank you for reminding me why humans are worth saving. Especially the broken ones." Then she was gone, leaving only a faint shimmer in the air and the lingering warmth where she'd touched his heart. Thomas stood alone in his workshop, surrounded by tools and half-finished projects and the coffee cups he'd been meaning to clean. But something had changed. The space didn't feel like a hiding place anymore. It felt like a workshop, a place where broken things came to be repaired. He picked up his phone and scrolled to his sister's number. His thumb hovered over the call button for a long moment before he pressed it. When she answered, surprise and relief evident in her voice, Thomas found himself smiling. "Hey, Jenny. I know it's been a while. I was wondering if maybe you wanted to come visit this weekend? I've got some stories to tell you. You probably won't believe them, but they are true. And I think I'm finally ready to start living again." As he talked, Thomas glanced at the mantel where Anna's ashes still sat in their simple urn. He would always carry her with him, in his memories and his heart. But Celeste had taught him something crucial. That loving someone didn't mean dying when they did. That grief and hope could coexist. That sometimes the most alien concept of all was the idea that broken things could heal without losing what made them beautiful in the first place. The rain started again outside, gentle this time, washing the world clean. And Thomas Reed, mechanic, widower, and survivor of an encounter with the stars, allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, his story wasn't over yet. It was simply beginning a new chapter, one where the past informed the future without imprisoning it. He finished his conversation with Jenny and got to work on Mrs. Henderson's truck, his hands steady, his heart still aching but no longer drowning. Somewhere in the Veloran Constellation, he imagined Celeste returning home, carrying his story with her, proof that humans were worth the journey across the stars. And in the quiet moments between the turn of a wrench and the tightening of a bolt, Thomas whispered a thank you to the universe for sending him an angel in the form of an alien, a reminder that even in the darkest night, dawn always eventually comes.